On June 4th, at approximately 7 a.m., the students' groups, which had just retreated from Tiananmen Square to West Chang'an Street, were confronted by 3 tanks. While shooting out poisonous gas, the tanks sped up and chased thousands of students walking on the bicycle lane. It was totally beyond the expectation of those naive and innocent students that the Chinese Communist authorities would use military tanks to pursue them. The students had already withdrawn from Tiananmen Square and were on their way back to their school in peaceful and orderly groups. Panicking to avoid the tanks, the students started jumping over the green arrowhead-shaped iron fence that bordered the roadside. Many students were injured. Most of the young women students did not have the strength to jump over the fence. All they could do was to get closer to the iron fence and hold tight. It was a heartbreaking and horrible sight. After the tanks passed, we saw that something tragic had happened to the students behind us. 11 students had been crushed to death under the tanks. A lot of students were injured. 2 lost both of their legs under the crush. This tragedy occurred at Liubukou. One of the injured students was Fang Zhen, a student of a Beijing Physical Educational Institute. What happened to him is typical and very sad. When the tanks were running over students, Fang Zhen did not think of his own safety. Instead, he lifted up a female schoolmate who was overcome by the poisonous gas and tried to move with her to the roadside. In a blink of an eye, Fang Zhen found the tank just behind him, so close that the big, thick gun barrel was just over his head. He hurried to push the girl student away, but was unable to avoid the tank himself. All he could do was to roll onto the ground, but that was too late. The upper part of his body was caught in the middle of the 2 caterpillars, whereas his legs was crushed under the tank. The chains on the caterpillars devoured his leg and dragged him for some distance before he could pull himself away. He fell off the tank's caterpillar and dropped onto the roadside. Leaning on the arrowhead fence, he fainted. Kind-hearted residents wrapped up Fang Zhen's wounds and sent him to Beijing Jishuitan Hospital. Because of excessive loss of blood, he was on the brink of death. Fortunately, his life was eventually saved, but he lost both of his legs.
My name is Yenhua Wu. I graduated from Beijing University. I was awarded a master's degree in Chinese classical documentation. In 1989, I was director of a research institute of legal documentation in the Chinese University of Politics and Law. During 1989 pro-democracy movement in Tiananmen Square, I was one of the organizers of the first demonstration. I participated in hunger strikes. On the night of June 3rd, when martial law troops of the Liberation Army started to crack down on the students with gunfire, I led a special security team to resist. It was at the Monument to the People's Heroes. We were there until 5:30 a.m. on June 4th, when the martial law troops finally drove us out of the Tiananmen Square. I had personal experience of that tragic incident in the Chinese history. I personally carried the bodies of some of the students who were killed. As an eyewitness to the Tiananmen massacre, and as a scholar specializing in documentation, having received a 7-year professional training in the Beijing University, I feel it's my obligation to record this significant historical event. In early March of 1990, on a raining and windy night, without any life-saving devices, I jumped down into a bay to swim from Zhuhai City to Macau. It took me 4 hours. I was almost frozen to death in the sea. I was bleeding all over my body, cut by the shells on the reef. I could see the wounds on my knee, but standing on the land of freedom in Macau, I felt so lucky to have gained my freedom and to be able to write the truth behind the June 4th incident. In May of 1990, when I just reached Hong Kong, I started writing the stuff relevant to this book. This is the earliest manuscript that I wrote while in Hong Kong. In regard of the 1989 June 4th massacre, there were 2 issues that have remained controversial or questionable for the last 18 years. For these 2 issues, I gave distinct answers in my book. The first question is whether students did die during the process of the Tiananmen Square clearance. My answer is yes. So far, there were 3 students we were able to identify by name. One is graduate student Dai Jingping of Beijing Agriculture University. Another is double bachelor degree holder Chen Ruixing of China People's University. The third is Li Haochen of Tianjin University. The second controversial question is whether there were any military tanks involved in the killing of students during the Tiananmen Square clearance. The answer in my book is very clear. That is, yes. I wrote in my book in the following passage. On June 4, 1989, at 4:30 in the morning, that is the time when the clearing action officially started, a dozen tanks were running towards the monument to the People's Heroes. That is the central area where over 3,000 students gathered. At that time, one student climbed to the top of a tent, waving a red flag in his hands, waving towards the tanks, refusing to retreat. A lot of people around yelled in loud voices for him to retreat. The student insisted on not retreating. Eventually, together with the tent, he was crashed into pieces by the tank. At the time when I wrote this book, the toughest part was in regards to the martial law troops, because that was more confidential. I have to read a lot, including some books of restricted publication, some documents open to the public, and some testimonies of the participants. Through comparison and matching, I finally unveiled the truth. For example, just now I mentioned the incident in Liubukou, where the tanks chased and killed the students. A lot of people at that site, including me, could remember the plate numbers of the 3 tanks. One of them was 106, but no one knows which specific troop they belonged to. During my research, I discovered a book published by the General Political Department of the Chinese Liberation Army, which is called One Day Martial Law. This is a book of restricted publication. One of the articles written by Colonel Lu Gang was entitled Test of Strength Beyond the Red Walls. This article talks about what happened on the early morning of June 4th. He took the order and set off from Tiananmen Square and chased the students in the direction of Lubukou. He did not write anything about the crash, but through this article, combined with other memoirs of eyewitnesses, I was able to confirm that those 3 tanks belonged to the 38th Corps, 6th Tank Division. That is one of the examples of my research. I made a diligent effort for the last dozen years in collecting documents, including literature of restricted publications and documents open to the public, including the memoirs of people who personally experienced events. I conducted this study using comparison and matching methods based on the professional documentation knowledge I acquired during my 7-year education at Beijing University. I eventually completed a book, Inside Information, of the 1989 Tiananmen bloodshedding clearing. The book was officially published on May 10, 2007 in Hong Kong. The book is available from publisher Truth Publishing House.